Now, 2019, Brazil elected a new president, Bolsonaro. And since he got elected, Brazil has increased illegal deforestation of the Amazon rainforest, which is kind of going directly opposite towards the direction we need to go if we're going to solve this climate crisis situation. And so today we invited an organization called Rainforest Action Network, who supports the frontline communities who are trying to save the rainforest. And Laurel Sutherlin is the senior communication strategist at the Rainforest Action Network. And Laurel, you're going to help us here to understand what is it that you're doing and why is that important. So before we start, could you just tell us how is your energy level today?
It's good. Well, thank you for having me. I'm still getting to the early part of my day, but I'm glad to be here and happy to be having this conversation.
You're based in America, New York, and that's also where the organization has its headquarters?
No, actually, our organization's headquartered in San Francisco, but I recently moved here, and so I work remotely, but I return back to San Francisco regularly.
Okay. So if you would start by explaining Rainforest Action Network to someone who has not heard about what is it that you're doing?
Sure. So, in the short of it, basically, we focus on some of the world's largest corporations and banks that have, they're doing terrible things and have consequences to their business that is causing destruction of forests or the exploitation of indigenous people. And we run public campaigns that pressure corporations to change their behavior. So we often demand that companies adopt strong policies that root out things like palm oil that are responsible for destroying rainforests or other destructive behaviors. So we also follow the money. So we look at a problem where there is destruction happening on the ground, and then we do research and investigations to follow the train of the money up to the companies that are responsible. And then we document that, we expose it through the media, and we then pressure the companies to make the changes that are necessary to stop the destruction from happening. So we often look at how a company is vulnerable, what is their brand, who is their customers, and so we run public campaigns sort of to name them and shame them into adopting better behavior. So sometimes that means big snack food companies, sometimes that means big Wall Street banks, but we use people power and grassroots organizing to go after big, powerful companies.
That really helps to understand. I have not talked to so many organizations who would publicly go out and target to shame and target to expose. So I'm guessing that in itself would be a little bit radical have you gotten would you be unique for doing that kind of approach to try to solve the climate situation?
Rainforest Action Network is definitely a little bit radical, but we're not alone. We definitely participate in a movement, and most of the work that we do, we've published a lot of reports, we do a lot of protests, we do a lot of media, and most of the work that we do is in coalition with allies. So whether it's local organizations, indigenous groups, other organizations like Greenpeace or Sierra Club. But I think RAN is rather unique, and one of the things that we sort of call it an inside-outside strategy that we use. So we will do civil disobedience, we'll hang banners, sometimes we do blockades, sometimes we'll do arrestable actions, but then we also have a corporate engagement strategy where we meet with companies and we help them understand exactly what it is that the destruction that they're causing, and give them our recommendations about what they need to do. And so that ends up with often a long-term relationship with some of these companies where we're sitting down at the table with them and helping them design policies that are going to fix the problem that we're identifying. So
Hmm.
it's you know we do a lot of market research. We do a lot of investigations and publish findings that expose, for instance, how banks are supporting fossil fuel industry, for instance. So we're not just protesting from the outside. We're wanting to say, we'll sit down with you and negotiate how to get out of the situation that we're exposing.
Hmm. It almost strikes me that it's quite quite flexible, the approach to actually adapt towards what is needed here, rather than saying this is how we do it. Yeah. So, how effective have you seen so far? Could you give us some example of the effects that you've seen from the campaigns that you've been doing?
Sure. For instance, palm oil is a major issue that we've been focusing on for many years. About 85% of the world's palm oil is produced in Indonesia and Malaysia, and palm oil has become the cheapest and most widely used vegetable oil in the world. So it's just absolutely ubiquitous. It's in like half of the products that are in grocery stores, the packaged processed food. And unfortunately, the majority of palm oil is grown at the expense of rainforests in Indonesia. Some of the most beautiful and biologically diverse rainforests in the world are being cut down and burned to put in these giant plantations for palm oil. So we've been exposing that story, pressuring the companies, mobilizing people to take action about this issue. And we have had a good amount of success. We've gotten many of the world's largest food producing companies to adopt commitments publicly to take out what we call conflict palm oil from their supply chains. Right now, we're seeing a lot of these companies make investments in the region. We're seeing them suspend relationships with mills and with suppliers that are identified as being responsible for the destruction of things like orangutan habitat, elephant habitat. So there has been a sea change. It's not enough yet. We need to see actual hard evidence of reforms on the ground in order for it to be a ultimate success. But it takes a lot to move these big multi-billion-dollar global companies, but we are seeing that happen. And then in another branch of our work, actually right now, just this week, so we also focus on banks and insurance companies that are contributing to support the fossil fuel industry, to do things like build new coal-fired power plants, to do things like big pipelines that move tar sands oil. And just this week, we had one of the biggest banks in the world, Goldman Sachs, just announced that they are going to commit to not fund any development of oil in the Arctic, including the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is something that Trump is trying to open up right now. And they also pledged to phase out the funding of coal, specifically coal-fired power plants. So that's a big deal. When a bank like Goldman Sachs, they're a very influential, really respected global financial institution, and so that sends ripples through the markets when a bank like that says Arctic is off limits for oil development, coal is on its way out. So that was a sort of a wonderful development. And then also we are now taking on the insurance industry because if you're going to the science is crystal clear, right, that we have to stop expanding the use of fossil fuels. We have to rapidly phase out fossil fuels if we're going to avert the worst kind of climate catastrophe that's coming our way. The United Nations, the International Panel on Climate Change, has made it very, very clear. And so one of the sort of unexposed pillars of the fossil fuel industry is the insurance sector. And they have gotten away with sort of a lack of accountability for up until now. But we are highlighting the actually very central role that the insurance industry plays in facilitating and financing some of these very destructive practices. And so just this week, Liberty Mutual, one of America's largest insurers, made an announcement that they will stop supporting coal. And so, this is a trend that we're witnessing. Well, it's more than witnessing, that we're accomplishing. That I think is very encouraging because, insurance industry, right? Like they're experts in identifying risk, and there's nothing riskier than climate catastrophe. And so I think by getting the entire industry on board with stopping support for this highly destructive industry could be sort of a game changer that no one saw coming.
That's fantastic news. I wanted to stand up 2 times when you said that the bank had decided to not fund oil from the Arctics, and also the Liberty Mutual, you said.
Mutual, yeah, Liberty Mutual.
Mutual. Yeah, I wanted to stand up there. Okay. So just to clarify then for myself here, which I think could help the listeners, the idea would be to follow the money. So if you see that the rainforest is getting shut down because people want to make palm oil to get to the stores, and then somewhere here you start to see that those money is actually the banks would have an interest in the palm oil industry. So you are actually following the money the whole way back to where it's ended, in a sense. So yeah, that would be Rainforest Action Network, the whole. Would that describe what it is that you're doing?
That's a reasonable summation. Yeah. I mean, we focus kind of all the way along that chain that you described. So we do engage, like for instance, with palm oil, we do engage with the traders that are directly, buying and selling palm oil. We also engage with the brands that are putting it in their products, and we also engage with the banks that are funding both of them. So yes, but we kind of go a bit of a holistic approach. But we also one of the things that is core to the sort of mission of Rainforest Action Network is that we recognize that the science and also the history is just very clear that indigenous people are the best stewards of forests and of landscapes in general. And when you have areas, it's not just a matter of drawing a line around and preserving an area of forest. It's a matter of protecting the rights and empowering the voices of the people who are the most passionate and the most capable of protecting landscapes. So whether it's in Indonesia or whether it's the Amazon, it's incredibly important to protect community rights and to stop oil companies and governments from exploiting and taking away ancestral territory rights of people. I think it's something like 80% of the world's biodiversity can be found on indigenous lands. Excuse me. And so that's just another core pillar of our work is not just fighting the big corporations, but also becoming allies and supporting the rights of indigenous people, because obviously it's just the right thing to do, but it's also actually the most effective thing to do as well.
That brings us into, I want to talk about the topic of how people could support you in a sense. And also to give the listeners here an idea on how big RAN or Rainforest Action Network is. It was founded back in 1985, is that correct?
Yeah.
And you've grown out to, like, part of the support you're doing is you supported 300 frontline communities in 40 countries so far. and that will be part of that. But you were just speaking about supporting the people living in the local communities in the rainforest. So that would be one thing, I guess, people could do to support. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the support part? What are you looking for support, and what can people do?
Sure. So, I mean, I think RAN stands out as being a pretty exemplary organization because I think we accomplish a lot more than I think a lot of, we're actually quite a small organization. I think we have at this point, I don't know, 50 or 60 staff, but we have folks in London, folks in Japan, folks in Indonesia, mostly in the United States. But we accomplish a lot for being a small organization. And I think one of the most exciting opportunities that we have as an organization for people interested in supporting is a program we have called our Community Action Grants. So basically, we offer small grants to frontline communities and indigenous groups that are working to defend their land from destruction of one form or another. And we make it very easy. So basically, it's a source of funds for organizations that often would have a hard time going through more official channels to get funding. So if it's an indigenous group that's trying to map their territory, or if it's a community that's trying to fight to stop oil development in the rainforest, they can come to us, and with very little if they don't necessarily speak English well, or if they don't have a official organization, they can still come to us, explain what their cause is, and get $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, something like that. And so we, in that manner, distribute many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to small groups in Indonesia, in Africa, in the Amazon. And so I think, if people want to support that kind of thing, donating to our Community Action Grant Program is a really wonderful way, because we just turn 100% of that money and we put it in the hands of women's groups, Native groups, and you can read about the stories on the website. We have a lot of different, there's photographs and stories about some of the different kind of work that people are doing, but it's something I'm really proud of, and something I think is one of the most sort of efficient ways that someone can have their donation go directly to supporting some really beautiful struggles for resistance against, as you mentioned, like Bolsonaro in Brazil, who has just it's just an openly racist, incredibly destructive abuse of power.
Do we, from your knowledge, do we have a lot of fear of having a person like Bolsonaro in Brazil right now? Is he creating?
Yes, it's a really dark situation. I would like to say otherwise, but it's terrible. He's created a impunity for. I mean, as I mentioned, he's just very openly racist. He's talked about essentially perpetuating a genocide against the indigenous people of the Amazon, and he's created a lawless environment where loggers and farmers and people realize that they can come in. We're seeing indigenous leaders assassinated. We're seeing forest burned. It's a tragic situation. It really is. And, thankfully the world is watching, and, there is a lot of support, of course, for the indigenous groups there. And there's a lot of people pouring resources and solidarity into that region. So that's the hopeful part of the story. And I think that there's increasingly a recognition on the global stage as these climate talks escalate about the central role that indigenous people need to play in that conversation. But what's happening in Brazil right now is terrible, and it deserves all of our support, every which way that we can amplify voices and give money and expose the heinousness of what's happening there. We should do, because it's almost a worst case scenario, really, honestly.
Yeah, he's been called the Donald Trump of Brazil, which also, if you haven't heard about him before, it kind of explains a little bit. And there's yeah, my worldview of him is similar to what you just described. So thank you very much for, like, we're gonna start wrapping this up. So I want to say thank you for taking your time here today to help us understand the situation with the banks, the Rainforest Action Network. If people would like to go to your website, that will be ran.org. So it's very 6 letters, right?
Yeah, and we always give lots of opportunities for people to take action. We have an email list. Basically, we run sort of very strategic, very long-term campaigns, and we identify moments of leverage where a bunch of people taking action can make a big difference. So I think signing up to our social media, signing up to our email lists is I think definitely a strong way that folks can take action to address these issues if they're interested in doing so.
Hmm. Yes. Any last word you want to say for before we end this?
I think the last thing I would say is just that we've reached the all-in moment. Like we are up against we are facing in our lifetimes the global decision about if our planet is going to be livable for future generations. And so, if you're sitting on the sidelines, now is the time to get up and get in the game. We all need to be doing everything we can because future generations aren't going to have the privilege of this choice that we have, and it would just be a terrible thing if we had to look back on it and say that we just let it go by the wayside. And we really do have power. We have the opportunity to make a change in our governments and in these corporations that are facilitating so much of this destruction. And so please get involved, whether it's our organization or another organization or your own, whether it's art, whether it's activism, I would say, please do your part because the time is now.